Luigi, how are you going to plead?
We believe that when you look at all the facts surrounding that, that the stop, arrest, detention, whatever you want to call it, was illegal.
Bobo, what are you doing? I'm trying to record a video. Come on, get out of here. We're trying to do a video on Luigi. It's a me, it's a Luigi. It's a me, it's a Bobo. It's a Bobo, look at me. She's so cute. Oh my goodness. Okay, Bobo, please, can I record? Bobo! Bobo, please! Alright, let's just have you get down. My goodness! Hello! Welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing an update on Luigi Mangione. So if you have not seen my first video on Luigi, go ahead and watch that first before we get into the update here, because there's several things I wanted to update you guys on that are pretty concerning for this man's right to have a fair trial. And yeah, there could be a situation where there is a mistrial, although to be fair, I doubt that's going to happen. I think what's more likely to happen is that some of the evidence is maybe going to be thrown out. So let's go ahead and get into the updates here. There's the first thing I want to start with is actually this incident that I haven't really heard people covering, haven't seen people reporting on. This is what may be a copycat situation, or it could be, for all we know, the real killer here, okay? There is a manhunt underway for an individual who opened fire on a home of an insurance CEO in Oregon. The shooting took place around 4 a.m. in the morning of February 21st. The media noted the recent incident is eerily similar to what happened to the UnitedHealth CEO, Brian Thompson. So this is the picture here. Suspect sought in shooting an Oregon workers' comp insurance CEO home. Security footage caught a glimpse of the person police believe may be the suspect in a shooting that damaged the home belonging to the CEO of an Oregon workers' compensation insurance organization. Very interesting. CCTV footage shows a suspect wearing a ski mask and dark clothes, possibly with a hoodie, holding a light-colored object in his hand. For comparison, the shooter of Brian Thompson was pictured on foot carrying what looks like an e-bike battery on December 4th. So that's just something interesting to note as we go into the update here about Mr. Luigi. So first, let's talk about some of the detectives working on the case, some of the individuals working on the case. And keep in mind, too, that there's actually two separate cases for Luigi. There is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Luigi Mangione, and then there is the New York case, the federal case, the United States versus Mangione. So there's two cases here, New York and Pennsylvania. Keep that in mind. So here we have an NYPD detective, Oscar Diaz, who signed as the person making the search on the inventory of Luigi Mangione's seized property in Pennsylvania, has a record of fabricating charges. A federal complaint states Diaz and other officers had full knowledge the charges made before the court against the plaintiff were false and untrue, and yet they proceeded with prosecution. So you've got somebody here, one of these detectives who has an apparent history of fabricating charges. And what's fascinating to me about this is to see how many people who are left-leaning complaining about the pretrial prejudice of Luigi with this HBO documentary, or whoever put out the documentary. I don't remember which network it was. But they're saying, you know, this is prejudicing his case before he gets in there, that there are being leaks made to the media. you know, and about evidence that like his defense team hasn't even seen. And it's fascinating to me because I'm sitting here going, well, where were you guys when the same thing basically was being done to the Whitmer Fednapping victims? Like, y'all were nowhere to be found, and you were sitting there laughing it up, cheering on their persecution and denial of their rights, the violation of their rights. So that's something that if you're one of my left-leaning listeners, that's something you might want to consider, this like kind of double standard that you've exhibited. So in here we've got another one. Oscar Diaz, who signed off on the inventory of Luigi's backpack, also has several complaints and lawsuits against him related to wrongful arrest. So this is actually a different one. There's two different people here. Oscar Diaz, the one that we just read about, and then there's also a Dave Leonardi mentioned in the initial indictment, has a history of creating false statements to charge individuals and a history of abuse of power. And a lawsuit from 2018 mentions the officer maliciously prosecuted the plaintiff and denied him the right to a fair trial by initiating a prosecution without probable cause and falsifying evidence. So that is concerning, that these are the people who are involved in the arrest of Mangione, that they have a history of potential corruption, of fabricating charges. And again, I would suggest that this is perhaps more common than you might think. It's been a week since Luigi appeared in New York's Supreme Court, shackled and in a vest. Since then, we've learned his legal team still hasn't received basic police reports or copies of his alleged manifesto. They've also raised concerns the federal government is deciding whether to seek the death penalty in his case. And the other thing about this that I find fascinating is that they keep putting out all of these like thirst trap pictures of Luigi. Every time he makes an appearance, it's like a photo shoot. You know, ABC News is even picking up on this. The defense attorneys for Mangione, the man charged with killing the CEO of UnitedHealth, insist a police search and arrest inside an Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's late last year were illegal. So we are going to get into that. I just wanted to show you. So this is what I mean. Like, this is the kind of stuff that is being put out there. Why are we getting feet posts from him? This man is in court. Somebody photographed his feet in the loafers. Is it just to show the shackles, that they are shackling his feet? Because that stuff is very painful. I understand that. But it's also kind of like, what is the goal here? Are we trying to make this man into some kind of like sex symbol or something? And I wanted to remind you guys about the bizarreness of his, of his story. Like I said, watch my first video on him about all of the weird aspects to this. This was part of it. I just want to remind people, in the vehicle where he leaves court, it has a Tyrone Biggins air freshener hanging in the mirror. Just another oddity. Like, okay, what is going on? What is happening here? And this is with the photos. You have a whole group of women who just thirst after, women and gay men, actually, who just thirst after this man all day. Luigi's best photo is always the next one. Luigi's lawyer says she was learning about his case from an HBO documentary because the police will not share the evidence they claim to have, but are instead sharing that information with HBO, with a network, a news network, or well, not even a news network, an entertainment channel. They're working to make sure he does not get a fair trial, and I feel the focus should be more on this than his look. I agree with that, but I also think it is, I mean, like, come on. It is what it is, okay? You can't deny that he does have very nice features. Okay, he's an Italian. What are you gonna do? We can't help it. We're born this way, right? Okay. So apparently he has made a statement. I think the last time we talked about this, I don't remember if I covered this in my first video or not. He has raised more than like $500,000, I believe, for his legal defense fund, and many people have donated to this. I also find this strange because a lot of federal judges shut down the fundraising um, pages for the J6ers who were seeking legal defense funds. A lot of them it had their legal defense funds seized if they had GoFundMe's, Give, Send, Goes. Not all of them. Some of them were able to raise the funds, but a lot of them were not. And so I just find it interesting that somebody was allowed to raise funds on his behalf to get him lawyers. So he apparently has made a statement. He says, I am overwhelmed by and grateful for everyone who has written to me to share their stories and express their support. Powerfully, this support has transcended political, racial, and class divisions, as mail has flooded MDC from across the country and around the globe. Meanwhile, it is impossible for me to reply to most letters. Please know I read every one I receive. Thank you again to everyone who took the time to write. I look forward to hearing more in the future, Luigi. Due to the extraordinary volumes of inquiries and outpouring of support, the site was created and maintained by his legal defense team to provide answers to questions frequently asked, to give accurate information about his case, and dispel misinformation. So they had to have this man put out a request to not send more than 5 photos at a time, because apparently there are tons of women who are sending him photos while he is in prison. And by the way, the prison is copying and scanning all of that information. So of course, like, just be aware, if you're sending pictures to this man, you are probably on some kind of list, okay? Just saying. Now, we have a gentleman who did a video here. He's going through the motion that we're going to read in a minute here. The Pennsylvania cops who arrested Luigi and quote-unquote found all of the alleged evidence detained him with a literal human wall, illegally searched and repacked his backpack, and interrogated him, all without Mirandizing him. Just throw the whole case out. Well, that's not happening. The case is not going to get thrown out. But I do find that to be interesting. So this is how they're bringing him in. They're bringing him in with his hands and feet shackled. They have him in a bulletproof vest as if he is Bane or something. You guys remember the absurd perp walk they did with him where he had like 50 people behind him, including Eric Adams, like the mayor of New York. Absolute insanity, highly prejudicial. They don't even do it for serial killers and things of this nature. So his case is very political. And I know that not all of my listeners, some of my listeners believe that he is guilty. I believe, and I posited in my first video, that this man is a patsy being set up, or he's some kind of, MK Ultra type victim here. Luigi's lawyers say the federal government is still considering the death penalty for him. They are sabotaging his case and making it hard for his lawyer to meet with him before and after court. They won't share the evidence with his team, but they are going on to HBO documentaries to share. Yeah, so the prosecutors in this case, the people involved, I mean, even Eric Adams sat down for an interview with a documentary team, and his trial has not even started yet. It's insane. It is entirely possible that the UnitedHealth CEO was yeeted by a corporate hired hitman due to the large lawsuits happening. So this is Boots Riley. I have to, this was what I was talking about in my first video, like the Boeing whistleblowers who were yeeted, and that evidence was planted on Luigi to frame him. I don't know, but it's possible. I tend to agree with that it is possible. And Gunopticon says It's important to remember Luigi has claimed evidence was planted on him and that he is innocent. I hope we can actually listen to him make his case. It would be tragic to help frame an innocent man simply because the online leftists liked him and his memes too much. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I'm seeing. Like, people who are more on the right seem to just be against Luigi because they see the other side kind of celebrating him, celebrating his alleged actions. And it doesn't seem like they've really considered that this man could be a patsy that's being, very clearly set up and railroaded, which is what I want people to consider. And that's why we're doing this video. I thought this was wild. There are huge amounts of press going into when he goes into the courtroom, but there's also tons of women who show up also. And his lawyer literally is getting, like, people are cheering and clapping for her. Listen to this. This is wild. I've never seen anything like that. Like applauding for a criminal defense lawyer. It's wild to me. These are the women who line the halls of the courthouse just hoping to get a glimpse of this man. Okay? Also very, very odd. Look at them all. It's wild. And of course they've got to have him in this vest, like as if he's some kind of Bond villain or something. It's silly. So we had a lawyer who says that the criminal complaint is garbage and doesn't.
I'm sitting here doing a deep dive of the Luigi complaints, and I came across something that makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever.
Yeah, so she says this doesn't make sense. You can watch this. I'll include the link to that in the description if you want to hear this lawyer's opinion on it. This is his lawyer, Karen Agnifilo. Karen Agnifilo. Oh my God, I'm not going to say this last name right. Lord have mercy. Criticizing New York officials for appearing in an HBO documentary about her client and discussing evidence that was never presented to her.
It was that this week on HBO, in a documentary, I see the chief of detectives and the New York City mayor, full hair and makeup done, sitting down and giving an interview for television and talking about the evidence in Luigi's case.
That's just crazy. I have to say that is crazy, because he's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. If they are leaking information to these outlets, news outlets, and they're talking about evidence that his lawyers have not even had the chance to see yet, I think it's crazy. Clearly, there is an attempt to taint a prospective jury poll before it's even gone to trial.
Talking about police paperwork that we don't have, talking about forensics that we have not yet received. I guess we have now today, but I didn't when I was sitting there learning about the case, hearing an actor play Luigi reading from a journal that they say is Luigi's, and we have yet to receive it from.
Yeah, this is also crazy. The fact that this documentary has an actor portraying him and he has not even gone to trial. It's wild. Like, I've never seen anything like that, and I don't know how that doesn't prejudice the case before it goes to trial. Obviously it will. You know that a lot of these people in New York who are going to be potential jurors are going to see this, or if they haven't watched it, they're going to hear about it from somebody, a family member, a friend, a coworker, colleague who has seen it, and it's going to obviously bias it.
The prosecution. What I did not understand was how.
Okay, so she did a press conference talking about this, and we will go into that in a little bit more detail. We have a thread here of him being brought into court again like some kind of Bond villain in a bulletproof vest. I think that's also like, I mean, imagine being him and they're telling you that you need why does he have to have all of these officers around him? Have there been threats made against his life? It is odd. What's the need for this? And then of course the photo ops, like all of the women out here, apparently 80 plus people from across the state, are all ages and ethnicities there to presumably in support of him. And then they have people outside the courthouse who are there supporting him, with these, big billboard type signs. They have people holding signs out there. It is just wild. It's almost like this is more of the her speaking outside. I don't understand what the show of danger is for. When I go visit Luigi at NBC in Brooklyn, I sit with him. He is unshackled. But for whatever reason here, despite all the law enforcement, they need him to be wearing this vest. They need him to be shackled. Well, it's about presenting an image. And so, that's what it is. That's what it's about. And then, of course, the photo ops of him, which are so bizarre. Like the feet pictures, is this really necessary? It makes no sense to me. I just think the whole thing is goofy. And this was her full statement. It's about 6 minutes long. We're not going to listen to the full statement, but we will read from the actual motion that they filed. This is an article about it. Defense disputes evidence in Mangione's arrest. Claim police violated his rights. I will include the link to that in the description. 7 to 10 officers surrounded Luigi, never telling him he can leave or that he is being detained. They questioned him even after he shook his head no. They did not Mirandize him for 17 minutes, took his backpack for something without a warrant, and magically found the firearm at the station. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit weird. You have to admit, whether you like Luigi or not, you have to admit there's weird things happening here, and we've got another one. NYPD Deputy Commissioner Kaz Daughtry, who personally addressed Luigi Mangione in Pennsylvania, has a record of misleading statements. He and Mayor Eric Adams are named in a 2024 ongoing lawsuit by police reform advocate Dana Racklin. The lawsuit claims NYPD members spread false information about her SA case in retaliation for her advocacy. So that's kind of concerning, right? This is footage that was released of him, footage of Luigi trying to check into a Pennsylvania motel. So you can see how he is dressed here. This is a new video. I will include the link to that also. And this is a thread here by Minky, police corruption surrounding Luigi's case. And again, like these photo ops, it's just kind of like, I don't know what to make of it. Starting with New York City officer Oscar Diaz, who signed Luigi's inventory list in Pennsylvania. Why was he even in Altoona when he is a New York City police officer? Diaz was called exemplary in the Manhattan DA's statement, but this is a lie. Yeah, that's a good question. And this is the thing we talked about in my prior video on Luigi, was that it seemed to me they had been tracking him using some type of sophisticated facial recognition technology, probably using AI to track him down, because this is a high profile thing, or they already had him in mind as somebody they were going to use as a patsy for this. And so the story that there was just some McDonald's employee who happened to recognize him, I'm not buying it, because in the pictures of him from the McDonald's, he's in a beanie, he has a face mask on, and he's in like a jacket. Okay, I see people like that all the time here in where I live, just walking around. There, at no point would I look at that and go, oh, that looks like that guy from the United Healthcare thing. I just didn't buy it. I believe that he'd been tracked there. And this is what it's sounding like, that you had a New York City officer there. What was he doing there? Come on. He signed off on this, NYPD, but this is Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So it's very interesting here. And this is just more information about Oscar Diaz. Detectives out doing the work of the courageous frontline work. Detective Oscar Diaz, exemplary, the finest. Yeah, X to doubt there. Officer Diaz, who is heavily involved in Luigi's case, paralyzed a man in custody by recklessly driving. Oh my goodness. Wow. He's paralyzed from the chest down during a ride in the back of a police van. Could you imagine? When he called paramedics, he told them to meet him at the station instead of where the van was stopped, so he kind of delayed getting help for this person. Diaz did not wait for an ambulance and instead took Cox to NHPD headquarters, where he was dragged out of the van and thrown into a holding cell before receiving medical attention. Wow. In September 2022, Cox filed a lawsuit for $100 million in damages against the city of New Haven and the 5 officers involved, including Diaz. The city settled the case for $45 million in June 2023, almost a year after Cox's arrest, marking the largest settlement in a police misconduct case in U.S. history. So think about that. This NYPD detective, Officer Diaz, Oscar Diaz, is literally involved in one of the biggest, like, police misconduct settlements in U.S. history. The biggest one, apparently. That's crazy to me. Absolutely insane. So, like, allegations of misconduct. Here's the full story with footage of the brutality Officer Diaz was heavily involved in that left a man paralyzed. Further details of Diaz's corruption, state board rules to reinstate officer involved in paralyzing somebody. Here is a full list of known lawsuits against Officer Oscar Diaz. Next is the lead investigator for the case, Lieutenant David Leonardi of the NYPD. Oscar Diaz, they've got Leonardi here. Lieutenant David Leonardi, lead investigator in the case, has a long history of police brutality and providing false information to the Manhattan DA, leading to the framing of individuals. Well, that's lovely. So they say plaintiff had committed no crime and was not engaged in suspicious or illegal activity. Plaintiff was placed under arrest and transported to the 79th precinct, where he was photographed, fingerprinted, and subjected to a degrading and invasive strip search. Wow. Plaintiff was then detained in a holding cell for some time before being transferred to central booking, where he was detained in a cell again. Sergeant Leonardi conspired to provide false information to the DA's office. Wow. On December 16th, 2013, plaintiffs were at a bar socializing. Suddenly, NYPD officers, including David Leonardi and Ray Filippo and others, rushed the location, forcibly grabbed and handcuffed the plaintiffs, and arrested them for no reason. The officers then made false statements to the DA's office, causing plaintiffs to be charged with possession offenses. Wow. We've got another case from 2015. Officers broke down the door of an apartment where plaintiff was hanging out, slammed plaintiff against the wall, handcuffed her, took her to the 79th precinct. Officers made false allegations about crimes plaintiff committed, which the DA declined to prosecute. Defendant officers approached plaintiff. This is another one from 2016. Assaulted him, resulting in a loss of tooth and scrapes and bruising all over the body. Wow. Sounds like a real nice guy here. This is another one from 2013. Officer Leonardi here. They approached them without provocation and ordered them to stand against a nearby wall. Plaintiff one did not attempt to resist, yet officers punched the plaintiff multiple times. So this sounds like a real dirtbag. Here's a list of known lawsuits against that officer. So you've got some questions here about corruption of the officers who are involved heavily in Luigi's case. Now, I'm going to include links to this in the video description so that you can, if you want, if you're interested in following this case, you can follow here. This is the New York case, the federal case, the United States versus Mangione. You can see here all the different docket entries. You can sign up to get alerts, so you get an email when there's a new filing made. And then I will include this as well for the Pennsylvania case, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Mangione. And now I want to get to the actual motion that was filed here. So first it starts with a writ for habeas corpus. The defendant is restrained in his liberty in the instant charges, inasmuch as bail was denied at preliminary arraignment. So he has not been given bail. Preliminary hearing was originally scheduled for December 23rd. However, it was moved and rescheduled for the 19th in order to coincide with an extradition hearing from the same state. The proceedings before District Judge Jones on December 19th, defendant waived the instant charges to the Court of Common Pleas in Blair County. The waiver was subject to contemporaneous agreement, appearing on record on the docket, which thereby preserved a later challenge to the sufficiency of the Commonwealth's prima facie case as set forth in the copy of a page in the docket entries of said proceedings. So let's just move forward here. A plaintiff avers that any evidence seized, obtained, or in the possession of law enforcement and or the Commonwealth purportedly in support of any of the instant charges was obtained illegally and unlawfully for reasons set forth separate in defendant's motion to suppress. So they're trying to suppress the evidence that was taken in Pennsylvania. The petitioner is not restrained by virtue of sentence after conviction for criminal offense. The privilege of a writ of habeas corpus is not now suspended in the case of rebellion or invasion. All right, so let's move to the actual motion to suppress the evidence. We're not going to read this whole thing because it is 23 pages. We're already 30 minutes into the video. That would be silly, but I will include a link in the video description so you can read this yourself. But we're going to go through some of it because I think that the details are important. All previous paragraphs are hereby incorporated as though fully set forth herein. On or about December 9, 2024, at approximately 9:29 a.m., the defendant was approached in a McDonald's located at 407 East Plank Road in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Uniformed, armed, and fully equipped officers of the Altoona Police Department, Detweiler and Fry. Said uniforms exhibited badges, patches, and other identifying insignia indicating their identity as police officers. Defendant was seated at a corner dining table that had a wall directly behind him and to his left. There also was another unoccupied chair to his immediate right. Defendant's only natural path and or route of ingress and egress was to his right. Upon their arrival, Altoona police officer Detweiler immediately posted himself to the right of the defendant and within an approximate arm's length of the defendant. This action was taken in order to detain or totally curtail the liberty of the defendant, to restrict the defendant's path of travel of ingress and egress from the table where he was sitting. These actions were performed to clearly exhibit said officer's authority over the defendant. The unoccupied chair was between the law enforcement officer and the defendant. No explanation was given to the defendant relative to why the police approached him at a McDonald's. At most, police indicated that he, quote, looked suspicious and had overstayed his welcome as patrons at McDonald's. As a patron at the McDonald's. So this is the thing, right? Like, you can't just do an illegal search of somebody. You have to have a reason that you're detaining him. Him just being in the McDonald's and looking suspicious is not enough. And this is why I said I felt like they had been tracking him already. They knew it was him, and they were going to corner him and try to basically get him, assuming he doesn't know his rights, you know, get him to say something that they could then use against him. It is stressed that the defendant was being detained, and other than that, he merely had overstayed his welcome. Defendant had been at McDonald's as a paying customer for approximately 30 minutes. It is clear that Altoona Police provides a specious and unreasonable reason for approaching the defendant. To wit, it must be assumed that the defendant was being detained for an investigation to which he was not informed. So, like, if you just go to a McDonald's and you're just sitting there for 30 minutes, There's no reason for a law enforcement officer to stop you and prevent you from leaving and then to start interrogating you without reading you your rights, without telling you that you're under suspicion of something or under arrest for or being charged with a crime. Like, you can't just do this. I mean, you can, but you're not allowed. You're not supposed to. The accompanying Altoona police officer, Fry, positioned himself next to Detwiller's right and next to the dining table, resulting in the formation of a human law enforcement wall, further detaining and totally curtailing Luigi's liberty, while additionally restricting path of travel or ingress and egress from the table at which he was seated. The existence, position, and placement of the two Altoona police officers was intentionally done to further exhibit said officer's authority over the defendant. At no time did the two officers indicate to the defendant that he was free to go, nor did they explain the reasons as to why he was being detained. Other than that, he looked suspicious or had overstayed his welcome as a paying customer at the McDonald's, where literally homeless people, sit there and hang out. Like, they come in, they loiter, they use the restrooms. Like, let's get real, okay? You, as a paying customer, sitting at a place for 30 minutes is not a reason for law enforcement officers to create a human wall around you and start interrogating you. That's ridiculous. Upon approaching the defendant, Officer Detweiler immediately made commands and instructions to the defendant, including but not limited to providing his identification, standing up, placing hands on head, etc. The totality of the circumstances, including but not limited to the positioning, demeanor, mannerisms, commands, directives, instructions, and other actions of the Altoona Police Department, showed that at the time the request for ID was made, compliance with the request was required. They've made a human wall around him, and they're start asking him, they're commanding him, show us your ID. He has not been placed under arrest, and you as an American should be concerned about this, because if they can do it to him, who's to say they can't do this to you? Defendant avers that the totality of these circumstances clearly show he was seized and unlawfully detained at this time and was in custody of the Altoona Police Department. Any reasonable person in the defendant's position would have thought that he was being restrained, detained, and otherwise not free to leave. The curtailment of the defendant's liberty and the defaming of the defendant at this point in time was in violation and in contravention of the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution under Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so here's another thing, right? If you're at a McDonald's and you're a paying customer, you're sitting there, you're eating, and a group of officers come up and they form this like human wall around you and they start issuing you commands. Let us see your ID. Put your hands on your head. What you need to ask them immediately is, am I under arrest? Am I being detained? Can I have a lawyer? And then you say nothing else. Those are what you say. You don't say anything else. Of course, you're going to have to comply with the officer so that they don't end up, tasing you or something. But you need to make sure you ask if you're being charged and detained. If not, they have to let you leave. Both officers from the Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate and question the defendant without any reading of his Miranda rights as required by both the Constitution of the United States as well as the Pennsylvania Constitution. These questions were designed to potentially incriminate the defendant. At no time did the defendant exhibit any threatening gesture or other show of force, meaning he is being compliant. He's not acting threatening in any way to these officers. Officer Detweiler further directed and commanded the defendant to stand up in order to undergo a frisk, a pat-down, although no circumstances existed at that time to justify said action. It is averred that said actions were further performed in order to clearly exhibit the Altoona police officers' dominion and control over the defendant, to further exhibit their power and authority over him. The Altoona Police Department took possession and control of identification materials presented by defendant and continued retention of this material. The positioning of law enforcement officers and personnel and the retention retention of a person's ID materials for background check, evidence of criminal activity, and or other investigative measures signal to a reasonable person that they are implicitly commanding that person to remain on scene while doing so. At one point, Officer Detweiler walked outside the McDonald's while in possession of the identification materials. During that brief interval, Officer Fry remained with the defendant within an arm's length and continued to curtail the liberty of the defendant, block his path of travel and movement from the dining table at the McDonald's. It is clear the Altoona police used the identification material and other information obtained via their interrogation to use as a background check and other investigative measures. The Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate the defendant, and this is all at a McDonald's, without reading him his rights, without placing him under arrest, without any kind of reasonable explanation for why they were doing what they were doing. Within minutes, other members of the Altoona Police Department, both uniformed and plainclothes, arrived at the McDonald's. So you have officers who are in plain clothes there with uniformed officers. You've got a whole team of them. This resulted in the defendant's path of travel from the dining table being blocked and prevented by two fully uniformed and armed Altoona police officers. Another fully uniformed and armed officer remained on the other side of the dining table. Numerous officers, approximately 3 to 4, also blocked the path and route of travel from the dining area in which the defendant was seated to the service area of the McDonald's. Numerous officers also prevented the defendant from accessing the exit doors. An agent from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office was also present. Guys, this means that my prior video was probably right. They had probably been tracking him for quite some time. They knew exactly where he was, and they knew what they were doing when they were making this arrest. To have somebody from the Attorney General's office is crazy. And remember, too, that Josh Shapiro made a big press conference about this. The Pennsylvania governor, who has some, there's a lot of questions about something he was involved in, too. A very shady case there. And of course, he's one of these people that was signing bombs. I mean, my goodness. A member of the Altoona police questioned the defendant about whether or not a backpack, plastic bag, and other items belonged to defendant. At that time, Altoona police officers seized the items and packages and placed them in an area behind law enforcement personnel. This is all very unusual. At all times thereafter, there remained Altoona police officers stationed between the defendant and the items of property believed to belong to defendant. These items of property remained in the control of the Altoona police throughout the entire time. Defendant believes this action further supports his belief that he was not in fact free to go. In order for the defendant to exit the dining table and venture to the service area of the McDonald's, he would have had to pass no less than approximately 7 to 10 of the Altoona police and other law enforcement personnel. At this time, it is believed there was an excess of 10 law enforcement personnel surrounding the defendant in this small dining area in the McDonald's. It again became abundantly clear defendant's curtailment of liberty, seizure, and unlawful detention and custody continued by this group of law enforcement personnel. No reasonable person would have believed that they were free to leave. The curtailment of the defendant's liberty and the detaining of the defendant was a violation of his 4th and 14th Amendment rights. During the period in custody, various members of the Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate the defendant with the intention of obtaining incriminating statements from him, of course. The totality of the circumstances presented by the Altoona Police Department again make it clear that the defendant was in custody and that the actions by the Altoona Police Department constituted a custodial interrogation of the defendant. And they were conducting this interrogation literally at a McDonald's instead of taking him to the station, putting him in an interrogation room where it's very clear like what is happening. Both officers from the Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate and question the defendant without reading any of his Miranda rights as required by the Constitution of the U.S. and the Pennsylvania Constitution. These questions were designed to potentially incriminate the defendant. And these are officers that are well trained. They've done this stuff before. They know exactly how to kind of coax out of you what they want you to say. In excess of 15 minutes had passed and the defendant's unlawful detention seizure, curtailment of liberty, custody, and interrogation continued. He still had not been given any information as to why he was being held. This constituted a curtailment of his liberty, seizure, unlawful detention, and custody of the defendant in violation and contravention of the 4th and 14th Amendment. The relevant police conduct exhibited at this time communicated to a reasonable person that they were not at liberty to ignore the police presence and just go about their business. They're literally being blocked off with a team of law enforcement in their face interrogating them and giving them commands. The actions by the police and others sent a clear and strong signal to the defendant and any other reasonable person that the officers would not allow them to leave while the inquiry was in progress. Finally, after 15 minutes of the defendant's unlawful detention, seizure, and continued custody, he was advised by Officer Detweiler he was officially under a police investigation. He was not read his rights, his Miranda rights, at that time. The defendant then asked who he was, at which time the defendant replied he was Luigi Mangione. He was further interrogated by members of the Altoona Police Department. After approximately 2 more minutes of interrogation, a member of the Altoona Police Department, Fox, read the defendant his Miranda rights. At the conclusion of the reading of said Miranda rights, the defendant was asked if he wished to speak to police, at which time the defendant shook his head no. Officer Fox immediately stated to the defendant, "You are not in custody." Bullcrap. That entire thing was him in custody. This statement was materially false, inaccurate, and contrary to law. It is clear that at this time, the defendant was in fact already in custody and had been in custody since his illegal and unlawful seizure, detention, curtailment of liberty. Again, this unlawful seizure, detention, and curtailment was in contravention of both the 4th and 14th Amendment. After the defendant shook his head, indicating he did not wish to talk to the police, the Altoona Police Department continued to question and interrogate him anyway. He was then subjected to another frisk. He was then placed in handcuffs and informed he was being detained. For reasons stated infra, it is the defendant's position that he has been illegally seized, detained, and in custody, contrary to the protections afforded to him under the Constitution. A photograph was then taken of him by an agent of the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General. Members of the Altoona Police continued to interrogate the defendant despite indications by the defendant he did not wish to speak to law enforcement. And remember, the picture went viral online of him it was taken at the McDonald's. You can see the white tile wall behind him. Absolutely insane that they did not do this at an actual police station. This was an ambush, guys. It was an ambush. Approximately 7 minutes later, defendant was physically removed from the McDonald's for, according to police reports, being placed under arrest for the crime of, quote, providing false information, false identification to law enforcement. He was transported to Altoona Police Department. So they didn't have a reason to arrest him at the time of just him being at the McDonald's and looking suspicious. That's not enough of a reason. There's no probable cause to arrest him. But they already knew who he was. This whole thing is such a setup. That's why I question this case. Said arrest was illegal and unlawful at this time, insofar as the defendant did not commit the crime of false identification to law enforcement. At the same time, members of the Altoona Police Department commenced a thorough search of defendant's backpack and other items. Defendant avers that this search and seizure was illegal and unlawful and in violation of his constitutional rights. During the search of the backpack, the Altoona police uncovered a clip wrapped in an underwear and other items. Contained within the backpack was a separate package secured by duct tape. Said package was opened via removal of the duct tape with a knife by members of Altoona Police Department without a valid search warrant. Said package contained a computer chip. Defendant avers that this search and seizure was illegal and unlawful and in violation of his rights. At the McDonald's, police also discovered a clip containing bullets that was wrapped in undergarments. At that time, the Altoona Police Department decided to repack the backpack and take it to the police department for further searches and seizures. At the Altoona Police Department, the police continued to search the backpack, resulting in the seizure of numerous items. So, suspected 3D printed suppressor, receiver, red notebook, referred to, titled by a police officer as a quote-unquote manifesto, multiple handwritten notes, etc. Defendant avers a search and seizure of items at the Altoona Police Department was in violation of protections afforded to him, and he avers that this search and seizure was illegal and unlawful. So they're asking that that be suppressed, that they should suppress that. This would include, but not be limited to, the original ID card seized from the defendant during the initial encounter by police, any and all items listed in the defendant's attached exhibit, any other evidence purportedly belonging to or taken from the defendant. Wherefore, defendant moves, due to his illegal detention, to suppress all statements made by him during the time he was illegally detained. All evidence seized as a result of the warrantless search of the defendant and his property. This includes, but is not limited to, the original ID card seized by the Altoona police. Any and all evidence that has been seized as the fruit of the poisonous tree. Yeah, absolutely. Any other evidence that they got from this initial illegal search and seizure is, at that point, fruit of the poisonous tree. So they're asking for that to be suppressed. And one other final thing to add to this. Luigi and Diddy are both being represented by Don DeLillo's nephew. So he's like the author of White Noise. I thought that was kind of funny and odd. But that's the latest with this. It really is looking to me like some kind of setup. And I suspect that my first video was actually correct. Where I said that, you know, they knew who this man was, like what happened at the Pennsylvania McDonald's, that some person working there just happened to recognize him. I knew that that was BS, a BS story that was being made up. No, this was like a parallel. They're trying to parallel construct like a reason to detain this man. They had none. Okay. Oh, somebody thought they recognized him. Well, you still don't have the right to just detain somebody because you think they might look suspicious. That's ridiculous. But I'm interested to know what you guys make of this whole thing. I always enjoy hearing your opinions, and I know, like I said, some of you guys strongly disagree with my theory that he is a patsy. Some of you guys do agree with me. I'm interested to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below, and I hope you guys have a good day.